Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek Ladies Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library.
Hi, this is Greg Cox. When I want to hear more about Star Trek, I tune into StarPodTrek.
Hello, we're back again with Ladies Trek Library. I'm Kavura, and I'm here with Jen. How are you, Jen?
Hi, good. Good to be here.
Great. And so, also, a few weeks ago, we just started being followed by the Star Trek reading group. Jen, do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, the Star Trek reading group is on Facebook, and the premise of it is that they select different books, and they make a post for each book with comments chapter by chapter. And so you can read along with the book and comment per chapter as you read. That way there's no spoilers, and you can read it together and discuss it chapter by chapter with other people reading it. They were picking books based on a voting system. And they're still doing that. But in addition, they've decided they're also going to be following along with the books we read here in Ladies Trek Library. So that's exciting. And they've already posted the book we're covering today, No Time Like the Past by Greg Cox. And when we know which books we'll be covering in the future, look out on the Star Trek reading group for those. And we'll be mentioning that they'll be covered on the Ladies Trek Library podcast.
Okay, awesome. So let's get to this book then. No Time Like the Past by Greg Cox. And I'll read what's on the back of the book. Stardate 6122.5. A diplomatic mission to the planet U-Sub erupts in violence when ruthless Orion raiders attempt to disrupt the crucial negotiations by force. The USS Enterprise finds an unexpected ally in the form of an enigmatic stranger who calls herself Annika 7. Stardate 53786.1, 7 of 9 is taking part in an archaeological expedition on an obscure planetoid in the Delta Quadrant when a disastrous turn of events puts Voyager's awaiting in jeopardy and transports 7 across time and space to U-Sub, where she comes face-to-face with one of Starfleet's greatest legends. Stardate 6122.5. Kirk knows better than most the danger that even a single castaway from the future can pose to the timeline, so he and 7 embark on a hazardous quest to return her to her own era. But there are others who crave the knowledge 7 possesses, and they will stop at nothing to obtain it, even if this means seizing control of the Enterprise. That's a little description of the book. So, Jen, how did you think it fits in with the, how do you think 7 fit in with the TOS era?
Well, before I had read anything by Greg Cox, a friend of mine had given me this book, and it'd been sitting on my bookshelf with many other Star Trek books that I haven't had a chance to read yet. And just based on the cover of the book, which shows Captain Kirk with 7 of 9 walking behind him on this planet, it looks like it could be a bad fan fiction. I think that's something everyone has joked about, Captain Kirk and 7 of 9. But after I had read some books by Greg Cox, and he's an excellent writer, I knew that if anyone could pull it off, he could. And I wasn't disappointed. I thought he did an excellent job. And, as implausible as it might sound with 7 of 9 going back to the original series Enterprise, I think it was great. It worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, now if 7 of 9 had to go back in time, how did it just happen to be Kirk's Enterprise? The one that we're familiar with in the 23rd century. But yeah, the story was interesting. I think they did well saying that she needed to regenerate, and there was no technology in that time for her to do that. They didn't have the Borg technology yet, but they were able to let her regenerate the best they could with drugs and with a little bit of technology that they could build. So they kept up that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. Yes, it's very improbable that if Seven of Nine was going to be transported back in time, that she would just happen to land on a planet where Captain Kirk is. But, they've done stuff like that on the show itself and in the novelverse. So a lot of Star Trek is not exactly plausible, but I still think he managed to pull it off.
Yeah, even that. Well, and of course the book does explain that about why it was Kirk, because he's such a big hero of his time and all, and because he went to those different planets and everything.
True. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into like spoilers of the end of the book now, but yeah, in the end of the book, it is all explained as to why she ended up getting transported back to Captain Kirk and having to visit certain planets where well-known original series episodes took place. There was actually a plan behind all of that, so it wasn't just a random coincidence.
And so did you feel there were any issues with Star Trek canon with this book?
No, I didn't. I felt like, of course, we have the characters who a lot of them are very interested in knowing about the future. Scotty talks a lot about, he wants to know about the engineering technology, and, there's a Federation diplomat aboard who's very interested in getting some secrets from Seven, but she's pretty clear that she doesn't want to disrupt the timeline and that she can't. She has to follow the temporal prime directive and she can't release any of that information. And Kirk supports her on that, even though, he sort of thinks about it too. Wow, wouldn't it be great finding some little hints about what's going to happen in the future? But so she doesn't really reveal anything, about the future. And she, even though obviously, she's got her Borg implants, and there are questions about that, she never really reveals how she got them or what they're for or even what period in the future she comes from. I thought I was able to fit into canon because of that. And as you mentioned, her need to regenerate, she does explain enough that they understand that and they're able to sort of help her by using a combination of like meditation techniques she learns from Spock and sort of like a primitive form of regeneration that Scotty and Spock hook up for her, as well as some sedatives and things from McCoy. So
yeah, I thought everything it fit well as far as the timelines. So you have Seven in the past, and she didn't reveal too much. Yeah, like it was good that she didn't even say what time period she was from. So they didn't know much. The diplomat, he was kind of Commissioner Santiago, who wanted, he was like, well, if she's from the future, we could use that knowledge. I mean, I don't really feel like anyone, from the Federation should feel that way. Like, he was just a little too hard-nosed about that. And he was almost like the Orions that wanted to kidnap Seven of Nine and sell her to the Klingons for her knowledge. But I guess that was just because they needed an antagonist on the Enterprise, just someone to be against Kirk and say all these things.
Yeah, I agree. When I was first reading it, I kind of felt the same way. I thought, I can't really believe that this Federation diplomat is, even if they didn't have the temporal prime directive in Kirk's time, he surely understands the implications about the future, and not knowing what's going to happen. But when we understand that in a way her journey was sort of all planned. So, at the end of the book, we learn that the time traveling device that Seven, that had transported her back to this time period was a device that a person on the planet Sarpedon created. And he created it with the specific intention that whoever found the pieces of this device, and there were 4 pieces that had to be put together in order for her to return back to her own time and place. And this was a unique time travel device because it could transport across time and space, and that's how she ended up going from the Delta Quadrant, to wherever Kirk is in the Alpha Quadrant or Beta Quadrant. But he explains that he did this, had her or whoever found his device do it for the specific reason of visiting these planets where people ended up using technology for their own destruction or in bad ways. And it was sort of to teach a lesson about technology in the wrong hands or by people who make bad decisions, what it can do. And so then I kind of realized that Commissioner Santiago was, really put there more to be like, not an antagonist, because really the antagonists were the Orions and his aide, who was really a spy for the Orions, and we didn't know that in the beginning. But he was there more to be the person who's the, I want what I want, regardless of the consequences. And, that how that sort of attitude can lead to destruction, as it did on, these other planets. But you're right. It was a little hard to believe that someone from the Federation would have that attitude. But, we've seen people in the original series and even later episodes where they've got an attitude that's a little surprising. The Badmirals and some of the rogue Starfleet officers who are, greedy and just driven by their own desires and not really the ideals of Starfleet. So I guess I could see it. And in the end, he did, he realized his mistake and he admitted it. So
yeah, he did change at the end, and it was a good payoff at the end, the way when the whole story came together that way. So how did you think this was similar or different from other time travel stories, or for Star Trek time travel?
It was pretty different in that, we find out at the end that it had all been a part of a plan, where it wasn't just a random accident. I mean, even though I don't think the creator of the time travel machine necessarily knew that it was going to be 7 that would, go on this journey. He knew it was going to be someone, and it was planned for that. And we really haven't, at least in any of the novels that I've read or in the, on the show or movies, I don't really recall like that sort of time travel. Usually it's more like an accident,
I think that this was, it was different because it wasn't as complex as something, like when we read the entropy effect and there was so many, they created different timelines and all, and this wasn't really a complex story. It almost wasn't as much of a time travel story. Most of it took place in the original series timeline, and their timeline. They did go back to the past of the planet Charon, and they went in the past of Sarpite, and it wasn't that complex, so it wasn't hard to follow like some time travel stories are. And they weren't as concerned with affecting the future as much, because they had their own mission to do, helping Seven get those artifacts. So it was mostly about that. So it wasn't a complex time travel story, which is good. I mean, it was a story that held together on its own, and it made sense. So, but I just wanted to say that's how it was different, because it wasn't as complex. So for people who don't really like time travel stories as much, that's what I mean. It just sort of it's a pretty easy to follow story as far as time travel goes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The entropy effect was a bit confusing with the different timelines, and I've read even more confusing ones. I don't know if you've read the Deep Space Nine Millennium Trilogy. I mean, that is like really difficult to follow time travel.
Yes, yeah.
And this was not. This was basically Seven gets transported back into Kirk's time. The majority of the story, as you said, takes place during that time. There are a few missions that she and Kirk go on to retrieve the pieces that they need to complete the time travel machine, where they're going back in time on other planets. But it's pretty simple to follow. It's not one of these ones where it's like, is this going to affect this in the future? And how does this change things? And does this person even exist anymore after they make this action? Yeah.
Okay. So, did you have any favorite parts of the book?
I really actually just starting off in the beginning where they're in, she's aboard Voyager, and Seven and Janeway and Tuvok and Neelix, they get this signal that's a Starfleet signal, but it's an old Starfleet signal coming off this planet in the Delta Quadrant. And they have to go and investigate, and they go down to the planet, and they find a sort of in a cave, like a monument to Captain Kirk. And just the mystery of that, I really just enjoyed the beginning of that, because it sort of, to me, felt like almost like an Indiana Jones Star Trek crossover, So I really just enjoyed the mystery of that part. I think that was probably one of my favorites. But I enjoyed the book overall as a whole. I thought all of the different adventures were interesting. But just started off really great for me. What about you?
I like the fact that they went to different planets that we were familiar with, like the planet in the Apple and then the planet Charon and Sarpedon. I mean, the fan service. I always like the references to episodes that we're familiar with. Oh, and they even mentioned Czar from Yesterday's Sun. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So a reference to another novel. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool that he referenced A.C. Crispin's novel, Yesterday's Sun. So that was neat. And Greg Cox's books are always like chock full of references to original series episodes, which I personally love. So I loved going back to these episodes and, some of my favorite episodes. But it was a different thing happening. It wasn't like Seven was going back to that episode. She was going back to the planet with Kirk. So that was really cool. And I also thought, in addition to all of the many references he puts into various Star Trek episodes, and not just in them visiting the planets, but there's one, his sense of humor, there's one chapter in chapter 25 where McCoy says, well, I'll be a Mugatu's uncle. Scotty says that. Yeah, so
yeah,
he throws in little things like that, referencing Star Trek. But in this book, he also, which was interesting for me because it's a time travel story, he also threw in some references to some of the other Star Trek series. So there's one part I highlighted in chapter 30 where Kirk says, "Just make it so," and another time where someone mentions an undiscovered country, and then a section with the Orions where they're in the cargo hold trying to hide out, and they come upon a cargo bin full of self-sealing stem bolts.
Yes, yeah, that was funny. Yeah, it is neat that he throws in all those little things, and it's like, yeah, because most of the people who read this book are going to be familiar with all of those things, and so it's just really neat that he throws them all in.
Yeah, and he also, I love how he sort of, in a way that only someone who loves it can do, he pokes fun at some of the stuff that we laugh at now when we watch the original series. So, of course they have low budget stuff and it's from the 60s. So, there's a scene where they visit the species on the planet Charon where, they're half black and half white. And Seven thinks to herself, well, the Borg had never assimilated a species with such improbable coloring. And there's another scene where they're on the planet Charon and, they're caught in the middle of some civil, a war or battle going on, and Kirk's Starfleet uniform gets torn. And it just made me laugh because it was like, how many episodes, does his uniform end up getting torn, right? Especially the one with the Mugatu, yes. and when he's with the Gorn. So it was just, and then there's like another time where, McCoy's got his, he's got calls one of the Orions a greenskin witch. So it was like all these little funny references that, making fun of the original series in like a loving way that I really loved about it.
And another thing he added that I thought was interesting was that that he said the Orions take testosterone before a battle. I mean, that was just interesting because it's never been said before on the show, and it was just a neat little thing to add to it. So that was just a cool thing to add to the mix.
Yeah, so it would be interesting if we ever spoke to him to ask him what made him where he came up with that idea, or if that was an idea that's maybe been used elsewhere. If it is, I don't, it's not a book that I've read, and I don't recall it from the show or the movies. But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. So any downsides to the book?
I did not have any. I love this book. Like I said, for me, it started out like Indiana Jones, and then it was like an adventure in the original series. And I feel like Greg Cox captures the original series in a way that no other author does. I mean, there's some other authors who've written great original series stories. But whenever I read his books, I just feel like it could be an episode. Like, he writes it just like as if it were an episode that I was watching at the original series. And I could see this being an episode. So I thought it was great, and I would definitely recommend it to fans of the original series. I also love Seven of Nine as a character. She's one of my favorite characters. So I love seeing her here. And to me, she fit right in with how he made it work. Now, if someone has never watched Voyager, I don't know that they would, enjoy it as much. Hopefully they at least know who the character was, but I think they'd still enjoy the story as a whole if they're an original series fan.
For me, I thought it was it was a well-written book, and I do like Greg Cox. I've read some of his other books. This one, I kind of thought it was more like, this is more plot-driven than some other Star Trek books. I mean, I didn't feel like it got into the characters' heads as much. It just seemed like it was just a story where they're just, it's story-driven, where they're just driven by what they have to do next and what happened to them. And, I mean, I would have liked to see more of what they were thinking, I guess. But it was a good story. It was enjoyable. And I do like that, like, and the way Kirk, because it focused more on Kirk out of the original series than the other characters. I do like how he was, when he thought about Seven, he did have the thought that she's attractive, but he didn't get into that too much, because, I mean, even though Kirk has this reputation as a ladies' man, but he doesn't go too far with it. And I like how the book treated that. Like, okay, I mean, yeah, he recognizes that she's beautiful, but then move on, we've got a mission. So, and I do feel like that really is true to Kirk's character.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you're right, it is a very plot-driven book. There isn't really much time at all spent inside the characters' heads. I mean, if anyone, maybe Seven, a little bit more than the others, but we still don't really get a great feel of, what it's like for her being on the Enterprise, in the past. And maybe that part of that is just because of who she is. She's, at the end of the book, there's a period where she starts feeling nostalgia and missing Voyager. She sees some interactions between Spock and McCoy, and it reminds her of Neelix and Tuvok, and she kind of feels a little homesick, and she kind of thinks to herself, oh, it's not like me to be nostalgic or to think about these sort of things. It must be because I'm tired and I haven't regenerated. But aside from that, we don't really get a lot inside of her head. But, I guess a book can't be everything, and I still really enjoyed it for what it was.
And another good thing I'd like to mention is that Kirk kept remembering all the crewmen who died in this story, which is something that, that the original series has been criticized for, the red shirts, and they die in an episode and no one remembers them, but Kirk always remembered their names, and he kept mentioning that, at least to himself in this. That was one thing he was thinking, like, oh, well, this person died and this person died. It is good that he kept remembering them.
Yes, and I agree with you on that as well about Kirk. And again, I think that shows that, how much of a fan of the original series Greg Cox is, because, really anyone who's writing it probably is a fan. But as you said, a lot of people who maybe aren't really into Star Trek Kirk has this reputation, and he's a womanizer, and, but if you watch the show, you can really see, he's really not the person who has the problem with women. It's Spock is the one who's made the comments about women being emotional and, things like that. Kirk, whenever he, is trying to seduce a woman, it's usually because he has got an ulterior motive. He's trying to escape. He's trying to save his crew. He did have some romances, but he was never, he wasn't like a pig. It's kind of, I don't want to insult pigs, but, if you're really a fan of the show and you watch it, you don't really have that opinion then. But that's sort of the reputation, that he's just sort of like a sexist pig who seduces all these women, and that's really not how it was. So I appreciate that as well, and I appreciate that it does show what kind of a captain Kirk is. That these 3 different red shirts who are killed, that Kirk thinks about them and isn't just like, oh, well, another one of my security details got killed, let's move on. He does have to move on, continue going with his mission, but it's not, he is thinking about that, and it's not like it just doesn't mean anything to him. And of course, in this book, we have a happy ending because when Seven goes back to her own time period, she destroys the time machine, and that means that it never happened in the first place. And so, the three red coat, if you want to call them red coats, red shirts. I don't know why I'm saying that. The three red shirts end up not being killed after all. And Kirk is the only person who retains a memory of what happened, and so he's happy, that he doesn't lose these members of his crew.
And I do think that was it was a very intriguing part in the scene when they were on Sarpedon's past and Kirk got buried in the ice and he died there. But since it's time travel, it turned out that part got erased. But yeah, that was a very gripping part of the story where she said she had to leave Kirk there in the ice. There was nothing she could do for him. So that was a very emotional part of the story that was very gripping.
Yeah. I mean, even though we knew obviously that Kirk wasn't going to die, because obviously then everything else in the universe would be what we know it is. It was still, an emotional scene. I agree. And it was well done. So
any other last thoughts?
No, I mean, I think I'll just reiterate that I loved it for what it was. I think it's a great original series episode, and definitely up there among my favorites.
I think it was good, but not as great for me. But it was good. It was worth a read because of the characters and the plot. It was a very entertaining story.
Yeah, it was an interesting story, which I don't know that we've actually even. Our discussion maybe didn't touch on that, but in order to return to her own time, there were 4 pieces of this machine, and Seven had to get all 4 of them. So it was like an adventure, sort of like a following someone on a journey where they had to, pick up different things along the way, and that's sort of a traditional. You see that a lot in traditional mythology that. The hero has to acquire these different things before they can achieve their journey. So in that way, and I enjoy that type of story. So I like that. Yeah, and so I would give it 5 out of 5 stars.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.